Well, Tom, just to kick off, could I just ask you, this is the only formal bit, if you could just say your name, date of birth and place of birth?
Their name is Thomas, but normally Tom Pevsner, born in October 1926 in Dresden in Germany.
But may I ask, I'm intrigued, born in Dresden?
Yes.
How come?
Well, my parents were German and lived in Germany, and that's where I was born and brought up until I was 9. Then we came over to England, and I grew up here.
Well, I suppose the next question, Tom, is really how did you get into the film industry? Before we look at the Lady Killers itself, but you know, what inspired you to move into the film industry?
Well, I wasn't particularly interested in films until I was at Cambridge. I went to Cambridge after 4 years in the army at the tail end of the war. So I was relatively old for a student. And I got interested in films at Cambridge and joined the Film Society, and then became in due course chairman of the Film Society. And our president was a documentary filmmaker called Basil Wright, who made Night Mail, among other things. And he was friendly with Michael Balkan. And Balkan had a policy of every year fishing around for a couple of bright young sparks out of the universities, and asked Basil Wright whether he knew of anybody. Basil asked me whether I was interested, and I didn't have to be asked twice. I abandoned my studies and joined Ealing, first as a sort of personal assistant to Michael Balkan. And it was understood that I would, at the first opportunity, transfer to the production department, but had to have a union card. In those days, it was a closed shop. And so I worked for Michael Balkan for a year, and then opportunity came up to become third assistant on the studio shoot of The Cruel Sea. And that was how I started, and worked with, Ealing was a permanently staffed studio. And they kept 2 crews, basically. They only made 1 film at a time.
So when you first started, you know, what did you have to do? What was the remit of it?
Bring the tea. I was a third assistant director, the floor runner.
And is that what you expected when you first when you entered the film industry?
Well, I was delighted.
Yeah.
I would have brought the tea for years with great pleasure. I first worked with Sandy McKendrick on the Maggie when I was the third assistant director, and then on the Lady Killers I had moved up to being a first assistant, and was that on the Lady Killers, and then worked with Sandy again on High Wind in Jamaica after he left, after Ealing closed.
As far as the origins of the Lady Killers, could you just take me through how you first became aware that this film was going to be produced, and you know, what do you remember of it, of the sort of its creation?
I can't be terribly helpful on that, because as an assistant director, you came onto the crew relatively late. The script was pretty well finished, and because the first work you had to do would be to do with breaking down the script, and so you would be on the other project that would be going on, and So scripting and casting, I was not really involved in. That was done before I was on the picture.
What had you just been working on?
I'm not sure. The first Sandy, Lady Killers was my second film as a first assistant. The first one was a film that Leslie Norman directed called The Night My Number Came Up. Sort of aircraft accident, aircraft crash film. But whether that was immediately before Lady Killers, probably.
Because Lady Killers was, its release date was 1955. So are we looking at about 1954, a year beforehand?
Yes,
right.
yes.
Do you remember sort of where you were when you heard that you were going to be working on the Lady Killers? You know, were you just told? You know, what was the routine at Ealing at that time about? You know, what?
Well, there was a studio production head of production. I mean, the man who organised the studio, and he called Hal Mason, and he would have allocated the crew that was going to be on that film. And I imagine, I don't remember, but I imagine he would have simply told me, and you, the rest of the crew, you didn't have any choice. But they were all people that one knew and had worked with before, so it was a very close family. Incidentally, I was, again, you can give me information, Sandy had worked with Bill Rose before. What on? Because I suspect that it's, Lady Killers is very much more sophisticated, complicated a film than most of the Ealing comedies. I think that probably, I'm guessing, is the difference between Tibby Clark and Bill Rose.
When you heard that you were going to be working on this film called The Lady Killers, what happens next? Do you get a script?
Yes.
And do you have to go away and read it? You know, what was sort of, you know, kind of house policy at that time? Is it do you become sort of you
get allocated to the picture, and that is all you do then. And the first thing you have to do is, and your big job is to break down the script into all the elements that are required, so that all the heads of departments have your breakdown sheets and know what is required, you know, in the way of effects or props or makeup, anything special that is needed. You put down, and that becomes the Bible on which you work.
So at that point, who are you the most closely associated with? Who is there any
particular? With the director. And you are the director's assistant. You are his voice to the crew.
It's and at that point, you know, you'd had a working relationship with Sandy Alexander McKendrick, and you know, what was it? Something that was it? You know, are you, as an assistant director? Is it a very sort of easygoing relationship, or is it a sort of
depends on the director?
Right, and with McKendrick, with Sandy.
Yes, there was no question that of him being grand. I mean, there are directors who play up their position. Sandy wasn't, but Sandy needed, I won't say needed help, but was, I think, always appreciated if you could take some of the weight off his shoulders.
I'm just wondering as well, when you first read the script, did, what was your reaction? Can you remember your
Oh,
sort of
I
first
loved
reaction?
it. I loved it. I mean, it was a great read. I mean, never mind what it looked like as a picture. It was a lovely script.
And obviously it's interesting you say that, because you see the script before before the script is filmed, and obviously for a viewer, somewhat member of the audience, obviously the version of the script they get is the performances of the actors, who are obviously some of the greatest first class character actors in Britain at the time. So but it's interesting that you loved it even before you even can visualise the performances themselves. So it was,
well, I mean, I'd worked with Sandy on the Maggie, and I knew, how he worked with actors and the performances he could get with the actors. The structure was there in the script, so you could get that from reading the script. But the icing on the cake, obviously, is the casting and the performances. And Sandy always produced those. He was very difficult, found it always very difficult to make up his mind. Did a lot of rehearsals, trying out different things. And of course Alec Guinness is a great contributor who has or had very clear ideas of the character he was building for the Lady Killers.
and when you read that first script, the script, did you have knowledge at that point who the cast were going to be?
We would have done. I mean, Alec was a given, I think, at Ealing. The chances were that if it was a comedy, Alec would be playing it. I'm sure that Herbert Lom, Cecil Parker, I mean, the five would have been cast by that time. I don't remember when Katie Johnson appeared, but I think she would have been cast fairly early because she was pivotal. But the smaller parts, no, they would be cast in parallel with the other preparation that was going on.
And I think obviously what's also interesting is we talk about the cast, and we'll come back to them, but one of the one of the great members of the cast actually is the location itself. When you read the script, did you visualise the kind of railway atmosphere, and had it been at that point decided it was going to be shot around the King's Cross area?
I think, I mean, my memory isn't all that clear. I think that by the time I joined, the basic locations had been found. That would have been done by the art director, Jim Morahan, in conjunction with Sandy. And I can't remember who was the associate producer. Was it Michael Truman?
Associate producer is Seth Holt. Producer,
Seth Holt.
Uncredited producer is Michael Balkan.
Yes.
Music, non-original music. Cinematography, Otto Heller. Editing was film Jack Harris. Art direction, Jim Morahan. Costume design, Anthony Mendelsohn. Makeup, Alex Garforth and Daphne Martin. Production management, Hal Mason and David Pears. Assistant director, yourself. Art department, Simpson, Robinson and Bert Davey. Sound, Stephen Dalby, Gordon Stone, Leo Wilkins and Harry Fairbairn. Special effects, Sidney Pearson, and there's some other crew mentioned, Harry Aldous, assistant editor, Joan Bridge of Technicolor, Felicia Mannheim, continuity, Doc Matheson, conductor, and Chick Waterson, camera operator.
Mm.
And that's all I have as far as the
Yes.
The crew.
Yes, well, and Michael Walken was got credit as the producer
Right.
of all Ealing films.
Right.
And the individual producer who was allocated to that picture of the resident studio producers would be called associate producer. So Seth Holt would have been, I think, associate producer on the credits, and Michael Balkan, the film would be produced by Michael Balkan.
I see. And so, and obviously, direction was Sandy McKendrick. Again, was that going to be decided straight away? You know, how did the Ealing work as far as its
Oh
directors?
no, I mean the point of having sort of usually around about 5 directors, 5 associate producers on the payroll is because they need a lot of preparation time. You know, the film shoots for 12 weeks roughly, but the director will most likely spend the best part of a year preparing, writing the script, and then the editing and post-production process. So Sandy would have been involved in it. I mean, Bill Rose and he might have come up with the idea themselves, and certainly Sandy would have been involved in all the preparation. And that's all he would have been doing at that time.
And so the writer, Bill Rose, and would have had a sort of a significant role in this
Yes.
preparation.
Yes, up to the completion of the script, he was obviously central.
So when you first got involved in the Lady Killers, what did you have to do? What was the first
Well,
job
the first
you had to
job, well, I mean, I don't know that there was a sort of set order, but the first main job was to do the breakdown, take the script and cut it up into its component parts and produce the paperwork that became the production Bible. But there would have been location recce's.
Did you go on any of those?
Yes, yes.
What do you remember of those recce's?
Well, they're great fun. They're one of the more pleasurable aspects of film production, because the world is your oyster. Anything is possible.
And on those recce's, you knew where to go. Obviously, the railway settings. So it would be the art director, yourself.
Yes, I mean, I think that quite a lot, I would imagine, would already have been established, and the script would have been written to the locations. It's always a great help if the writer has a clear idea of what the place that he's describing actually looks like.
So King's Cross, in a way, was central to the story.
Absolutely.
Right from the beginning.
Yes. And Frederica Street must have been a huge find for them, because it combined the entrance to the railway tunnel and the house, which normally you would expect to have to do in separate, a la Argyle Street. But here it could actually be done for real. Not quite for real, because we didn't throw the bodies down. But the physical connection between the tunnel face and the back of the house was actually there, could be shown in one shot.
Tell me first about your memories of Frederica Street, before we go into Argyle Street. Frederica Street, long gone now, but an extraordinary street, because it's built within the sort of structure of the railway tunnel, pretty much. It's a sort of railway street, isn't it?
Yes. Well, I think, as I remember it, they were flat-fronted, just 2 terraces, the whole length of the street, each side 1 terrace, the whole length of the street. Brick, red brick, I think, not stucco, as I remember it. And curiously, I believe that on one side, the houses were numbered up to, I don't know, up to 58. And on the other side, the numbering started at 60. And 59 was missing. And so 59 became Katie Johnson's house, which we built astride the blank brick wall at the end of the street.
And it's an extraordinary construction.
It's a lovely set.
It's fantastic.
Yes.
How long did that take? Just to kind of, did you just literally have that street as it was? You were. How long were you based in that street?
Well, it's no through road. There was no through traffic, so it was ideal for filming. We really controlled the street. I mean, you blocked it off. You let people through between shots, but when you needed it cleared, you could clear it, which is very rare on a major city location.
I suppose I must ask you because I think the strength of The Lady Killers and a lot of Ealing films, particularly this sort of post-war, in a way, there's a sort of I think of sort of what Italy was doing in the post-war, the sort of neo-realist movement of using location. Ealing films use locations. They, it's not. It's we think of Ealing as a studio, but so many of the films are actually shot on location.
Yeah.
Use locations so brilliantly. What was that like in those days to sort of turn up somewhere and actually turn that into a film set? Because now it's commonplace. But back then, it was less common, I think.
Yes. I don't think, I think that certainly at Ealing, you pretty much reckon that most likely there would be a location shoot involved. And there were small pictures that were purely studio. It depended what the script said, really.
Do you remember, when your reconnaissance trips, having a wonder, what what it was like seeing those places? Because they're remnants of a sort of industrial railway landscape, that weren't going to survive. But at the time, how were you familiar with those places? Had you seen Frederica Street before? Had you ever come across it?
No, but it's a very typical street of that area. It's really, I think the key is that it's a world that is Katie Johnson's world. It's not an idealized version of England and English society, but it's a theoretical one which doesn't, and certainly didn't at the time, relate to reality. And that is true of Lady Killers and Kind Hearts and Coronets, Lavender Hill Mob. I think The Man in the White Suit is probably the closest approach to a realistic rendition of English society.
In Frederica Street, did you get to meet or see the people that lived there? What was their reaction to?
They enjoyed it. I think we used spare space. We used rooms in various of the houses as dressing rooms, restrooms for the artists, makeup, hair, all fitted in, and people. We were there for quite a long time. I don't remember exactly how long, but I think probably 3 or 4 weeks, and people got quite used to us and enjoyed it. It would have been a much more open society. I think all the people in Frederica Street, or a lot of them, knew each other, and it was a sort of community being cut off in a backwater, as it were.
So in those days, would there have been the sort of the coaches and the vans with sort of facilities for the cast and the crew, or would it, as you said, would have used just knocked on
Well,
people's doors?
as far as is possible, we used local premises, but there were obviously cars and vans, and it was made in 3-strip Technicolor, and the camera in that, I don't know whether you've ever seen one, it's the size of a wardrobe, and so the camera vehicles were numerous.
I also wonder what it must have looked like close up, the set, because obviously it's the camera is fantastic, sort of camouflaging sort of things that are not quite in shot, and I just wonder what it looked like, just actually seeing this house.
It was for real. I mean, it wasn't for real, but it looked for real.
Really, yeah.
Only the outside. We didn't use the inside. We didn't build the inside.
So the facade of the house was pretty much for real.
The exterior was, I mean, not for real in terms of the building materials, but in appearance. And then there were bits and pieces that had to be done elsewhere, and the stuff on top of the roof where the Major is up on the roof and Herbert Long and fighting with Herbert Long. Obviously we couldn't do that on the roof on location, so a bit of the roof was built in the studio, and the same with the entrance face of the tunnel for the ending of the film. That was built on the studio lot and shot there.
At what point was it decided that you were going to use two very different locations for the old lady's house, Mrs. Wilberforce's house? Was there a decision made, or why was that? Is it just editorial license, artistic license? But
Sorry, I don't know.
to have the two, you created a facade, the front of her house, but obviously when you have your back to the house, you see a completely different street.
I see, yes.
When was that decision made? It was.
Well, I think that must have been during the pre-production. I think that the idea was to tie it to the station, to make it all much more concise. If you can actually just turn the camera around and you establish, and you can see her coming out of the station in the cab.
I suppose the beauty of the station and the station environment, and I'm of a generation that never grew up with the sort of steam era, but when you see the film, you can smell the steam. You get a feel of this sort of railway environment straight away. It's really it's depicted brilliantly straight away. You're in a world close to the station.
Yes, it was certainly convincing. I know that we had to do a shot, I think I was on another film, of an express train going past a signal box on the Euston Main Line just outside, near that tunnel. And we got talking to the signal box crew, who thought that Lady Killers was lovely and realistic, and they could believe all of it. And they had become so involved that they never noticed that, in fact, we were running our trains on the down line when it was going up, and on the up line when it was going down. But they had suspended their disbelief.
And so at what point do you become location bound when you made the film? Because obviously the first bit, you said your first part of the job was to break down the script, and break down the screenplay into a shooting script. What next? When do you sort of get onto location?
No, you don't break it down into a shooting script. You break it down into what we used to be called dope sheets. Sheets with all the information that isn't necessarily mentioned even in the script. like how many extras you need on the location. Everything that costs money has to be down there, um, so you can be sure that it'll be there on the day that you need it.
And as far as when you got onto location, do you remember what sequence the film was shot? The location sequences. What would you have, would you have shot the Frederica stuff first, or the Argyle Street, or can you remember?
No, I don't remember, but we would certainly have done Frederica Street as a block. And then the odd bits and pieces, the telephone boxes. I think that the main telephone box, where the four of them are on the phone to Cecil Parker, who is watching the station, I think that was a place called Vernon Rise.
That's correct, yeah.
And that was just a phone box that we dumped down there. And
which is just off King's Cross Road. It's just behind, just in front of Percy Circus. Which leads
yes.
So each block would have been shot separately, would they? Each location sequence, for example, Frederica Street, Vernon Rise, Argyle Street.
Yes, you can't jump about. You have too big a circus that you're carrying with you.
Mm-hmm.
Argyle Street, as I remember it, had to be shot on a Sunday because we needed to control an area where there was much more traffic. The police couldn't block off. And then again, you would separate the night shooting from the day shooting. We had quite a lot of the last sequences at night, so there was quite a stretch of night shooting, which is always very unpleasant.
In what way?
Well, it's hard to keep concentration at 3 in the morning.
The robbery sequence in Cheney Road. What do you remember of the making of that section?
And mainly the ingenuity of Sandy's staging of it, because it was a scene that basically has 2 points of focus. One is at the front of the money van, where the driver and co-driver have to be taken out, and the other is at the back of the van, where simultaneously I think they're at work on the doors with a crowbar. And Sandy managed to combine showing the critical moment of one part of the action and then going with movement to the other end of the action and showing a critical piece of that and then doing the reverse movement. It's a very complicated shot, which I think the audience probably wouldn't even be aware of, but it's a technician's joy to watch something like that because it's so clever and so ingenious. What else do I remember about the robbery? The marvellous location, because it was so enclosed on all sides. It was a little world, a lost world of its own, and you could believe that they could get away with it on this place because it wasn't overlooked. And it was a sequence that the location and the action came together very, very well.
And you're absolutely right. It's a splendid location because you've got the gas holders to one side, you've got the you've got those walls, those very high walls that were built around the gas works, and the Culross buildings blocks as well. So, and it is sort of cut off as well. It's it's off the main drag as well. So again, I presume
you could imagine that a hold-up could proceed completely undisturbed in that place. Alas, no longer in existence, I gather.
were you aware of these places before you worked on the film? I don't know how well you knew London, but did you, were you aware of these sort of the sort of industrial landscape of North London?
Well, one was very aware of it as an area, mainly because of the gasometers. I think a lot of buildings, interesting buildings, have become visible as surrounding buildings are pulled down. One certainly didn't. One was aware of the Peabody type blocks, but otherwise there wasn't anything that you should particularly notice.
Out of curiosity, in those days, just shooting an area like that, what do you have to do to kind of give you the clearance or release to film? Do you get in touch with the council? Is it the formalities of shooting?
Well, it's at last changed. There is now a central authority that you can go to. The way there is a major office in New York in the mayor's department, and we have now a system. I believe I have not shot in London for a long time. But there is now a central office that will handle your requirements and is oriented to giving as much cooperation as possible. None of that existed in those days. But on the other hand, productions were very small compared to what they are now. I mean, now in the production department you have associate producers and assistant producers and production supervisors and production managers and a huge bevy of people, which is necessary because I suppose the scripts and the action get more and more complicated and more demanding. But we were very simple folk then. We had quite small units and as a result relatively little transport. And I think it was in the borough's gift and your local police station. And what the standard was that you went to the local police station and you said, you want to film? And they would say, well, go ahead, but don't expect any help from us. And if you get to be a nuisance, we'll move you on. And that was about the best that you could hope for. And, as you got to know them, you could perhaps arrange for a couple of off-duty policemen to stand by the set to handle irate ratepayers.
But certainly in the cases of Frederica Street and Cheney Road, that area, because they're a little bit off the beaten track. But obviously you shot the sequence at the King's Cross Station itself, where there's going to be a lot of people around. That must be slightly different. That must be much more, I suppose you have to sort of make sure that everything's done to a certain time, because I presume you don't have as much time in those sort of busier locations.
Well, it depends entirely. I mean, there you're not dealing with the police. You may be dealing with the railway police, but you're mainly dealing with the station master and his crew, and you would discuss with them what you want to do and where you want to do it, and they would come up with suggestions of platforms that they could make available for you to work on. It's a matter of discussion and hoping that you come upon people, but people generally are interested in filmmaking and are happy to help if they can.
And was that your experience
yes.
on The Lady Killers?
And
it was,
Frederica Street, the residents were very warmly welcoming us, and I think they enjoyed it.
The other location, obviously, the location that which is a lovely location. Is the old lady's house from the back? You know, just if you could just about strain your eyes. Obviously, that's Frederica Street, and there's the wonderful set of Mrs. Wilberforce's house. But obviously, when we turn our back to that, we have this sequence, which looks down from, as if we got our back to her house and looking down Argyle Street.
Yes, towards the station.
Towards St Pancras Station.
That's right.
And I presume that Argyle Street location was chosen because of that view down, and you could see the station.
That's right. It tied in the station to the house, and in the same way that the fact that we built the four walls of the house, would tie in the same house with the railway cutting, the tunnel entrance on the other side. So you had the whole thing could be seen to be real as far as the audience was concerned. It wasn't cut together out of different places, but it was a real place in King's Cross.
And in this case, it was Argyle Street. What do you remember of shooting here in Argyle Street?
Well, I think that Argyle Street was very simple, because I think we shot it on a Sunday, because the police said that they couldn't control it during the weekday. And we had, Argyle Street was virtually empty. I think we emptied it for the shot. And we built the front door, a flying piece, the front door, and a little bit of wall on each side of it, so that you could shoot through the open door over Katie onto Danny Green with the cello case full of money, with the station behind and the street behind, and the Buick car with the other four in it.
So it was shot on a Sunday, and it does feel very quiet. There's also a telephone box that is in the street, which I'm not too sure ever was in that street. Do you remember? Is that one of your kind of class telephone boxes that used to wheeled around London?
I didn't think it was in Argyle Street. It was overlooking. I mean, it was the phone box in which Cecil Parker was reporting to the phone box in Vernon Rise, watching Katie come out with the trunk in the taxi and then going back in and coming out again the second time. But I thought that was, I'm sure you're right if you say it was in Argyle Street. The point of it was that from it you could see the entrance of the station where the taxi was coming out. I don't think it related visually directly to Katie's house.
No, I think you could see it. We could certainly see it from the house. Just to show you the sequence you never see is the image going. That is the house. If you were looking at the house in Argyle Street, obviously you never see it from that direction. You always look down the street.
Yes.
But that's what it looks like. It's actually a hotel called the Wardonia Hotel. Was the name of the building that you were using as a camera point to look down the street.
I see. But I think that we didn't use that. Didn't shoot on it as Katie's house.
No.
Katie's house was a flying piece, a wild piece of set with the front door.
Right. And where would that have been situated?
That would have been situated at the top end of Argyle Street.
Right, which is here, which is there.
Yes.
So that's the top end, and that's looking down. That's looking down from.
Well, it would be a set piece that would, as it were, occupy the foreground of this shot.
Right, I see.
That set up.
So what's the technical term again for it? You call it a flying...
Well, I can call it a floating piece of set, or a wild piece of set, or...
and you say that that whole sequence would have been shot in a day, pretty much, would it? Or a couple of...
Well, I mean, yes, there was only them coming back, well, you know, the cello case bursting open. That was the only... Actually, there must have been some reverse angles on the policeman who calls, but that was at night, so probably would have been shot on the evening of the other. I don't think we were there for more than a day.
It's amazing, isn't it? You're there for a day, and it's immortalised on celluloid forevermore. Isn't
Yes.
it? It's amazing. Again, you know, it's another interesting street. It's very different to Frederica Street, but Argyle Street's interesting, because the style of housing, which was
Well, it's grander than Frederica Street. Frederica Street, I don't know what Frederica Street would have been, because they were, I think, 4-storey houses. So they were rather, and they couldn't have been railway workers that they were built for. Presumably a 4-storey means that you had some kind of staff. But certainly Argyle Street would be a step up the social ladder after Frederica Street.
And I presume in those days not as many hotels as there are now. I don't know if you know the area today.
Yes. No hotels, I would think, or very, I mean, there would have been the 2 grand hotels, the St Pancras and the Great Eastern. There might have been some boarding houses round about, as there certainly were round about Euston Station. So presumably it's the same.
But the lovely thing about the sequence in Argyle Street is the exposure of the money, is the money kind of flying out the case. Can you remember how many takes, how many takes that was shot in?
No, but I don't think it was very difficult, very complicated. Who was driving the car? Peter Sellers, I think. Stop and start might have presented some problems, but I think it was... And Danny Green was not the quickest of studies, but it wasn't a difficult sequence to shoot.
So on the day, what would your role be? For example, take a sequence on Argyle Street. What were you doing? I just get interested to know what the sort of what you would be, where you would be, what you'd be doing during a shoot.
Well, I'd be next to the camera, and I'd be organising control of the area, putting people out to stop pedestrians wandering onto your set in the middle of the take, setting the crowd, the extras, well, anything that the director wanted.
So you're very close to Sandy McKendrick.
Yes. Yes, I mean the only part of his job that you're not involved with is talking to the actors.
I presume that you have to listen quite intensely to what he's saying and what he's doing.
Well, his discussions with the cameraman and the photographer and the camera operator. Obviously, you then have to liaise with them because they can only tell you what is in the shot, and no good blocking off areas which aren't in the shot. So that you get from the operator.
Generally, as a general question, Tom, what were you learning from Sandy McKendrick? Because obviously, what skill, tricks of the trade, and skills, were you sort of picking up from him as being by his side on a film like Lady Killers?
Well, watching him work with actors was the most fascinating part of it, particularly not on Lady Killers so much, on High Wind, where he was working with children, which is very difficult, and which he was extremely clever and good at.
Well, you were very You know, you're sort of Ealing was blessed with these wonderful actors. You know, from Alec Guinness, Peter Sellers, Herbert Lom. You know, sort of a wonderful group of very skilled actors. It's a funny film. You know, did the humour come across as you're making the film?
Oh yes.
Yeah.
I mean, Alec's performance, you know, is in itself funny without being a great belly laugh, but it's very subtle. Well, not all that subtle. It's quite over the top at times. And watching the interplay between Alec and mainly Herbert Lom was always fascinating, because they're both very creative actors, but obviously not necessarily creative in exactly the same direction. So there was some tension there occasionally.
And Katie Johnson as well.
Oh, well, she was a doll. She was so unpretentious and so pleased to be doing the film, enjoying it enormously. Money for old rope, she'd say. We put her in a boarding house on Ealing Common, which was like half a mile away from the studio, and we sent a car to bring her in the morning. Oh, you don't need a car, I can walk. Different from most actors, but she was sweet. And the tea party is one of my favourite scenes.
It's fabulous, it really is. It's the gathering of the old ladies themselves. It's just wonderful visually.
Superb piece of casting, finding all her friends.
But certainly, as far as the casting, it was, you know, it is really, you know, just spot on, wasn't it? You know, when you think of Guinness, Parker, Lom, Sellers, Danny Green, it's, you know, a great team.
And all the small parts too. What's his name?
Well, you've got Jack Warner as
the sergeant.
As the sergeant superintendent. That's right.
What's his name? The
Frankie Howard.
Frankie Howard as the barrow man. And Fred Griffiths as the taxi driver he attacks. That's
right. It's a lovely sequence as well. Do you think that Bill Rose would have, you know, expected that? You know, obviously when you in those days, you know, you write a wonderful script. Do you think that he visualises those actors and those performances?
No, not the actors and the performances, but he. You could cast that with other people. I mean, the strength is in the script that you start with.
The script's brilliant. Dialogue's fantastic, but you know, we are talking about some of the great actors as well. You know, and I think that there is something that Guinness is. Well, we obviously you're very familiar with his you know, working with him, but it's remarkable performance.
Yes. I saw it recently, 2 years ago, on a big screen, and one forgot how detailed the performances are, how subtle, because on a television set it passes you by, but it really is worth seeing on a big screen.
I agree that's what they're made for.
Yes.
You know, at the end of the day, with a lot of people, unfortunately, these days have to expect to see kind of classic films on a smaller screen, but you know, all of these films were designed for the big screen.
And
you know, cinema.
It so happens that it was made with Technicolor 3-strip, so that the print can be revived as it fades. It can be freshened up.
Just as far as the location shooting, just being in the King's Cross area, was your role? Would you have stayed in the area? Would you have stayed overnight when you were shooting? Let's say, so for example, in Frederica Street. You know,
No, you would drive down in the morning. No, I mean, if you stay away, production has to pay for it. You have a whole unit in hotels. It gets extremely pricey, so as far as humanly possible, you have a daily location system, and everybody goes home at night, and if you've got to find your locations close enough to base, which with King's Cross obviously we had.
And during periods where you're having a break from shooting, where would you go?
Well, there would have been catering facilities for lunch and morning rolls and afternoon cakes, which would have been provided by the production. So you had the time off shooting, but you didn't actually have to go anywhere. And there was a supplementary food provided by the Greasy Spoon at the entrance of Frederica Street, where everybody used to go for breakfast. Fried egg sandwiches, fried egg and bacon sandwiches. I think everybody put on a great deal of weight. The production had arranged for a table for breakfast for the sort of director and cameraman, the sort of senior people. And at the beginning, we all met at the Great Eastern Hotel for breakfast, while the crew ate at the Greasy Spoon. But slowly, the Great Eastern people all defected because the bacon sandwiches were so much better than the Great Eastern breakfast. And in the end, we all went to the Greasy Spoon, which was very good for the sort of morale of the unit. Everybody had half an hour sitting around gossiping.
That comes across when you watch the film. Is it really true? Was there this great morale? Because you watch a film like that, and obviously a lot of the other Ealing films, particularly a film like Lady Killers, because of the humour throughout and because of the sort of the kind of characters that are portrayed in it. But it does feel that it's just a group of people having a really very good time. Enjoying each other's.
Yes, that's part of the director's skill.
Yeah.
On all films there are always tensions. It's the nature of the high cost of every minute. And Robert Hamer used to always say if he asked for something that he wasn't actually there ready for him, he would always say, how long will it take to get? And if you said 15 minutes, he would know that 15 minutes of shooting time on that film's budget would cost so and so much, and he would say, well, I'll wait for it, or it's not worth it, I'll do without.
But certainly on Lady Killers, you mentioned, were there tensions on that film? Or
yes.
Really? Yeah.
There are bound to be. Everybody's under pressure.
And that pressure is deadlines. It's basically you've only got a certain amount of shooting time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you have to fight for, if you need more, you have to fight for it.
Were there any particular problems you had on making the film, as far as any of the scenes that proved more difficult?
No, I don't think so. I think it was pretty well organised. There were no great dramas.
And all the actors got on fine, did they?
There's a certain amount of rivalry. You didn't mention the parrot in your cast list. Took a very active part. And in fact was the inventor of that scene where Alec and he are playing against each other. The parrot is dancing and Alec is moving his head. The parrot invented that.
It's terrific. But I suppose, as you say, in those days, we are talking, dare I say, over 50 years ago. I suppose it was simpler. There's less cast and crew around.
You gave your signals with a flag, a red flag, a green flag. Green is we're shooting, red is cut. worked perfectly well. And then they invented walkie-talkies, and everybody on the unit had to have a walkie-talkie.
But we also, the cameraman was Otto Heller. Is that somebody you'd worked with or before, or?
He did a number of pictures at Ealing. I can't remember which ones. But he was not sort of permanent at Ealing, but he was, as I say, if they needed an extra cameraman because the others were busy, he was called in, and he was a curious character. He was, I think, Czech, but had left Czechoslovakia very young and had moved around Europe, during the pre-war period, and I think had forgotten his Czech, but never actually learnt any other language properly. So he couldn't read English, for instance, and he always had to be told what the script said. Sometimes got it wrong, forgot whether it was supposed to be day or night.
Bizarre. Perfectly adequate, looks good.
Oh,
the
yes.
film looks
No,
great.
he's a good cameraman.
Yeah. Was he chosen, because obviously did some men find it more difficult or prefer to work in black and white than colour, or, obviously 54, a lot of films were still being made in black and white at that time.
No, I think everybody, colour was a prestige thing. Black and white was their trade.
And again, obviously working in colour, particularly in location shots in shooting, was that more problematic then, or did you have to have did you have to see things in a different way?
No, I think if I remember rightly, that three strip was very slow stock, so you needed a lot of light, which is always a problem if you've got to cut around a whole vast amount of lighting equipment. But it did need a lot of light. On the other hand, I believe that you could get better effects in dull weather in colour rather than in black and white. So, whereas with black and white you might be sitting on a location waiting for the sun for days, with colour you could push on.
Right, that's interesting. So,
but the three strip gave you great control over the colour, because you could separate the three strips and change your printing on one of them.
and going back to the location of King's Cross, I think that what is interesting is that the Lady Killers has become, or King's Cross has become synonymous with the Lady Killers.
Really?
The amount of people that talk, we talk about sort of King's Cross area in the sort of in kind of cultural history or some sort of Lady Killers is the first thing people always talk about. And it is amazing. It's sort of the two are sort of kind of co-joined now.
Yes, that's interesting. I think it's well deserved. That's why I think they ought to put up plaques.
It's well, sadly not one in Frederica Street, although a tiny bit of Frederica Street exists, but but none of the buildings. Just a sort of a physical sort of that stretch exists, but it's now flats there. Argyle Street is identical. There's been no change whatsoever. The sort of the view from Katie Johnson's house down to St Pancras Station is just absolutely, has not changed at all.
I've never been to the Chambers. They have open days occasionally, and every time we've rung up, they're fully booked.
And sadly, those have stopped now because the building is being redeveloped. So I can't see any tours happening until the building is complete,
Yes.
which will be in a year or so's time, and it'll be a very different type of tour, because before it was pretty derelict, and now
Yes.
it's going to be state of the art hotel. It'll be amazing. Because obviously, what's interesting is that hotel, by the time you were shooting there, had already been closed for over 20 years.
Has it really?
Yeah, it closed down in 35.
Good Lord, I didn't know
It was
that.
built in 1862, and it was closed in 35 because, from what I understand, it was totally unpractical for the modern era. It was built at a time of chamber pots
Yes.
and so there was no toilet facilities, so people didn't go there, and it was expensive, and it was sort of fading glory even in the 30s.
Good Lord.
Yeah, and the railways took it over, and it was just used as offices.
Well, the railways altogether were taken over around about that time, weren't they? Because they were all losing money. When were they nationalised? They were taken over during the war, weren't they?
That's right.
And they probably weren't formally nationalised till after the war. But
Yeah, it was after the war. But the names of the companies still existed until more recent years, when you lost the LNERs and so forth.
yes.
But, Tom, I suppose what's interesting, just talking, finally, just talking about lady killers, is just that, and I suppose I just want to have this down on record. Obviously, we talked about it in passing, but King's Cross, has become sort of synonymous with lady killers was synonymous with King's Cross and vice versa. But it's interesting because geographically, the King's Cross that's portrayed in the Lady Killers is not a real one. And that's where that's the art of cinema, isn't it? Film can do that.
Yes. Yes, and it's inhabited by unreal people. And all the 5 of them are types that are brought to life by very clever acting.
No, it's true, and but the for example, Katie Johnson's house, it is kind of amusing that it's strange that they're 2 very separate locations, but they are sort of fused as one place. And
Yes.
Is that common, do you think? Does that happen in your experience in the film industry? Is that something? Is that part of?
Yes, very often you have a location that is absolutely perfect for 3/4 of the shots that you need, but you can't do the other quarter there. You have to find something that will match on the reverse angle. I think that is quite common. But what was extraordinary with the Lady Killers is that the main location, which is the house, the approach to the house, and the exit at the back of the house with the railway tunnel, are all in the same place and can all be tied together in shots that show 2 of the parts of the location at the same time. That's very rare, and I think helps the tensions of the film, its tightness and control.
But there is that sort of strangeness, the fact that that the house is set, and the very fact that there would be a house either side of these terraces, and there would just be a house.
Yes,
at
yes.
the end.
And it states right at the opening that she is different, because you've got the terraces, classical terraces, and then this kind of gingerbread house closing off the end of the street. And you just know that there's got to be a Katie Johnson who owns the house.
Mrs. Wilberforce.
Mrs. Wilberforce.
Yeah, no, it's very true. So
But I mean, those main locations could be tied in together, but they still have to be patched. I mean, the Argyle Street reverse angle is a patching job. The
when you say patching, for those who don't,
well, I mean, you cut in stuff that doesn't really geographically doesn't go together, but it looks as if it went together. The top of the roof is another thing that couldn't be shot there. So it was built in the studio, and the facade of the tunnel couldn't be shot on location and was shot in the studio, on the studio lot. Oh, and of course the street that where you first see Katie, where she goes to the police station and then to the newsagent, that was shot on the studio lot at Ealing. It was not King's Cross.
yeah, that's got a feel of a studio street.
Yes.
It's a certain sort of atmosphere that
Yes.
somehow makes it feel like it's a studio. It's yeah, I wonder why would that have been? Why not use another street, or is it just?
It's probably practicalities. You know, it is cheaper to do things in the studio if you can. And there was a street set standing in the studio, a permanently standing set, which was built for one of the Ealing films and was left standing and would be revamped and repainted and details changed for whatever you were doing. And they set the police station and the newsagent on that street. And it would have been very difficult to do because it's quite a complicated long tracking shot with her being greeted by all the neighbourhood. To do that on location, a busy London street, would have been much more complicated.
And as far as location in those days, sort of sound. How much was there any use of external sound, or is that all done later in the studio, or would you have used anything?
No, probably it would all have been done in post-production.
Because I do think on a general note, generally I think that going, the location use in Ealing makes the Ealing films very strong. Obviously, you have to use studio sequences, but there is something that makes that Ealing sort of genre so kind of intriguing, is the fact that there was this use of kind of real places.
Yes.
Was that something that you didn't always have to, I suppose. Was that sort of something that was considered at the time important?
Well, I think that there was a pendulum, wasn't there? Hollywood pictures in the 30s and 50s would never dream of going on location. They built everything. They had a stage space and they had the labour force on. And why go away when you can build it in the studio? And then in the 50s, directors started rebelling and saying, well, we want to go out on location. Up to then, that had been relatively rare. And then it became de rigueur. The same with the new wave in Paris. And, before that, the idea of taking a wild camera out on the streets of Paris to shoot a feature film, people would have said you're crazy.
Well, it's true, and I suppose there's also the kind of the development of lightweight cameras and things, which made it more easy to go out on the street. And
yes, it wasn't all that lightweight. I mean, the revolution in equipment really came a lot later.
So have you got a? Do you like all the Ealing films that you sort of were associated with, or?
Yes, I like the Maggie very much. Yes, Lady Killers and the Maggie, they're both Sandy's pictures. I like Hue and Cry very much, and I'm delighted that you because it's much neglected.
I think it's wonderful, and it's got a lot. It's got fantastic scripts. It's got, you know, the idea of the sort of comic creator and children reading comics, and the, you know, that sort of picture story culture, you know, and the sort of the slightly latchkey kids of the post-war.
Yes.
You know, it's a piece of social history. It's got everything. It's got the period it was made in. It's this fantastic use of London location. You know, wonderful child actors.
Do you know there is a sort of brochure which I remember seeing, presumably in the 60s or 70s, which was being prepared by the GLC, I think, of London locations.
You mentioned that to me. I actually haven't seen that. There's been sort of things that can follow that up, you know, but I haven't seen that one. It's most probably in the BFI
I
archive
don't
or
know
something.
whether it ever was produced. I think it was being prepared when I saw it. I don't know whether it ever became public.
Mm.
But it would be very interesting if it does exist to look at it.
It's out of curiosity, The Lady Killers was most probably shot in the sort of 1954 period. It actually was released in 1955. Do you remember? Would there have been a sort of grand premiere?
I don't remember anything like that. There must have been some kind of celebration of the opening. I don't remember there being premieres in the modern sense. But maybe I was just not invited.
And what was it like when do you remember the sort of moment when you knew the film was finished? Was there, or you already work on the next film?
Probably, yes. I mean, people left the film by degrees. You know, it wasn't that, and the shooting crew would depart when the actual shooting was over. The sound people would carry on. There'd be tidying up to do. So it wasn't that everybody left at the same time, but there was usually a group still of the unit still, which would be interesting for you. I don't know. Have you come across unit stills?
I've seen some. I have seen some.
Lady Killers?
Yeah, I've seen a couple. I haven't actually looked in the BFI archive to see what they've got. You mentioned the Grant archive.
Yes.
I haven't checked with them either. I'll have to look, see if they've got them online. Otherwise,
I think I gave what's his name? Robert?
Roland?
Robert? Something with an R.
Yeah, it's Roland Grant.
I think I gave him a couple
Ronald?
Ronald.
Ronald Grant.
A couple of stills, a pose still of the group of 5 instrumentalists sitting there, you know, deliberately posing awkwardly, clutching their instruments. Herbert Lom with his violin case a la Tommy gun.
As if it's the classic, you know, I think, it's the classic scenarios, you know, you put on a record and then the person outside the door thinks they're listening to the band rehearsing. It's fantastic, you know.
Yes. They don't reduce to a quartet or a trio or a sonata as people get knocked off.
Boccherini, Luigi Boccherini.
Yes, it's the quintet.
Yeah. Yeah, and Tristram Carey did the rest of the score. The but do you remember? How the film was kind of what sort of what the responses were?
I don't remember in detail. I mean, I know it was very well received. And very well received in the States, I believe. But I think Ealing tended to be a kind of poor relation of the rank organisation who wielded the power.
But I suppose it's interesting looking back now. When people talk about Ealing cinema, they see Ealing films as a genre. They see it.
Yes.
Did you feel that? Did you feel there was some sort of look and feel of an Ealing film, or
Well, to some extent, yes. I mean, I think that there are similarities. Lavender Hill Mob, The Man in the White Suit, various similarities. The Maggie. It's a view of English life which is nostalgic and quirky.
Even then, it was themed or seemed nostalgic back in the 50s and the 40s.
Well, yes, Passport to Pimlico, clearly Lavender Hill Mob.
So
were not realistic pictures.
No, I think that's interesting because when we look back now after half a century at the Passport to Pimlico's and this idea of a community and a group of people living in this sort of proximity and the kind of interrelationship between people, and I'll say even then in the 50s that world was seen as a sort of disappearing world or a disappeared world.
Yes, yes. I think it was a reaction against the war years.
Yeah. Yeah. So inevitably, Ealing is a sort of is a result of a sort of wartime. It's very interesting because you got what you were doing, and then you've got the Paul Pressburger School, which is something slightly different. There's
quite different, yes.
Yeah, but both in a way, very very British and very much a sort of kind of response to the war.
Yes, and neither of them, although superficially they have the trappings of reality, but neither of them produce realistic films, which presumably again is a reaction to the enforced sort of making of propaganda films of great realism during the war.
It's true. I suppose that's why it's interesting. Why Lady Killers sort of you got the mixture of this sort of obviously the in the face of it the superficial sort of reality because of the locations, King's Cross and stuff, but obviously the set pieces and the community of people that are in the film are as you say, there isn't a they're more caricatural in a way of some sort, or it's
don't forget that Lady Killers was really the last of a long line of films of that character, which presumably got refined as it went along. And Lady Killers was the most refined one that at last closed the series. And the charm of Hue and Cry is that it has the freshness of the beginning of the line.
It's fresh and raw, isn't it? There's a sort of there's a rawness to it, I suppose, and it's again. Did you have anything to do with the Hue and Cry?
No, long before.
It's before you were involved, weren't you? It's 47 or something, Hue and Cry.
Something like that, yes.
Yeah, because there was another one that came out around before Hue and Cry. Was it? It Always Rains on Sunday. You remember that one?
Yeah, it was a Robert Hamer picture.
It. Yeah.
It was a thriller, wasn't it?
That's right. Yeah.
I think it was after Hue and Cry, anyway.
Sort of slightly gritty London, kind of London film, but not didn't quite work. It was. Why do you like Hue and Cry so much?
Well, because it's fun. It's doesn't take itself seriously. It has marvelous performance by Alistair Sim, and it's Emil and the Detectives, a surefire formula.
That's right. It is. It's the youngsters. It's
Youth and innocence defeating sophisticated evil. Harry Fowler, I think, was the leader of the gang of kids.
That's right. That's right. Young Harry Fowler. I think it's just because it's just the precursor of what was to come a few years later. That it's the one that isn't, as you say, as sort of remembered as the Lady Killers and the Lavender Hill Mob and Passport to Pimlico.
That's right. The two forgotten ones are Hue and Cry and the Maggie.
Yeah.
Whiskey Galore.
Whiskey Galore
is one that is always remembered and that is frequently on the television.
Yeah, that's right. Whiskey Galore, Kind Hearts and Coronets. Yeah. You know,
Yes, Kind Hearts and Coronets was really a different tradition. I think Robert Hamer was the odd man out at Ealing.
It's
a lovely picture.
Oh, it's terrific stuff. So looking back on the Lady Killers now, do you when you last saw it, did you still enjoy it?
Yes, enormously. Somebody wrote a book about Sandy about 10 years ago, and they did a new print. The BFI, I think, did a new print and had a special showing when this book came out. And I took our grandchildren to it, and we were very nervous because, it's a slower speed to what they're used to today. And I thought they might get distracted and bored. But they adored it. It really worked, and it worked. I mean, I adored it. I hadn't seen it on a big screen for 30 years. And then on a terrible print, I remember Everyman ran it for a time. I think they ran a 16mm print that was absolutely faded and awful. But they did this beautiful new print, thanks to 3-strip, and I was fascinated. I noticed things that I'd forgotten were in there, sort of things that are too small to notice on a small screen.
And your grandchildren, did they enjoy it?
They loved it.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I suppose it's you look back over the time you spent making movies, and there aren't many that you're proud to have been associated with. But I think Lady Killers is certainly one that I don't mind if some of them are forgotten. It's not Lady Killers.
Well, I think the Lady Killers won't be forgotten as long as people are interested in film.
Yes.
I think that's the Lady Killers will be screened and enjoyed by generations to come.
Yes, and I mean Sandy's tally is not bad. Sweet Smell of Success and Lady Killers are two classics.
Absolutely. I think that for different reasons, The Sweet Smell of Success is it's a blowout. It's a knockout film.
Yes.
There's a poignancy to it and a sort of potency to it, and the acting and the look of it and the cinematography. I think it's James Wong Howe, isn't it? Cinematography, I think. But it's amazing.
Yes.
It's hard, really hard.
It has a viciousness.
Viciousness.
That I don't think anything else in the cinema approaches.
Yeah. And it's also a film that I don't know what it was like, how it was received at the time. Obviously, there were big actors, people like Burt Lancaster. Yeah, Burt Lancaster, Tony Curtis, big actors, but a disaster.
Yeah.
Whereas by the 70s and 80s, it had become, a must-see item. When I was a youngster watching, learning about film, you had to see some kind of success. And obviously the beauty is when, is that some years ago, I think they put out a new print, and it was just fantastic, just to see that on the screen. It was marvellous. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you. It's just fascinating to just
reminisce.
Yeah, reminisce and hear from someone who was there. So that's really great.
I go back even further, and what I quote, which people tend not to believe, is that I was also assistant director to John Ford.
Wow, that's you worked with Billy Wilder as well, didn't you?
Yes,
yeah.
I did a couple of pictures of him.
Wow, so great to the industry. So
yes,
well, Tom, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. It was very kind of you to give me some time.
Not often that I get the chance to wander on down memory lane.
That's great. Well, thank you very much.